Course title: Arguing About Literature. Lecturer: Sammy Babak. Source: Johns Chilb, John Clifford, A Brief Guide to Arguing About Literature, 2nd edition. Thank you for your attendance. Don't forget to like and share the video. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more content to come. Element number 7, Theme. Theme is one kind of issue that comes up in literary studies. At the same time, we suggest that the term theme applies to various literary genres, not just short stories. Recall that we defined the theme of a work as the main claim it seems to make. Furthermore, we identified it as an assertion, a proposition, or a statement rather than as a single word. Charity is obviously a topic of Welty's story, but because it is just one word, it is not an adequate expression of the story's theme. The following exercise invites you to consider just what that theme may be. Number 1. Try to state a text's theme as a mid-level generalization. If you were to put it in very broad terms, your audience would see it as fitting a great many works besides the one you have read. If you went to the opposite extreme, tying the theme completely to specific details of the text, your audience might think the theme irrelevant to their own lives. The phrase "the moral of the story" suggests that a story can usually be reduced to a single message, often a principle of ethics or religion. Plenty of examples can be cited to support this suggestion. In the New Testament, for instance, Jesus tells stories, they are called parables, to convey some of his key ideas. In any number of cultures today, stories are used to teach children elements of good conduct. Moreover, people often determine the significance of a real-life event by building a story from it and by drawing a moral from it at the same time. These two processes conspicuously dovetailed when England's Princess Diana was killed in a car crash. Given that she died fleeing photographers, many people saw her entire life story as that of a woman hounded by the media. The moral was simultaneous and clear: thou shalt honor the right to privacy. It is possible to lose sight of a story's theme by placing too much emphasis on minor details of the text. The more common temptation, however, is to turn a story's theme into an all too general cliché. Actually, a story is often most interesting when it complicates some widely held idea that it seemed ready to endorse. Therefore, a useful exercise is to start with a general thematic statement about the story and then make it increasingly specific. With a visit of charity, for example, you might begin by supposing that the theme is everyone must give up their dreams of innocence and paradise, just as Adam and Eve did. Your next step would be to identify the specific spin that Welty's story gives this idea. How does her story differ from others on this theme? Note, for instance, that Marion comes literally face to face with the mortality of women much older than she is and that the experience fills her momentarily with wonder. Try to rephrase our version of Welty's theme so that it seems more in touch with these specific details of the text. Number 2. A theme of a text may be related to its title. It may also be expressed by some statement made within the text. But often various parts of the text merit consideration as you try to determine its theme. In our discussion of a short story's language, we called attention to the potential significance of its title. The title may serve as a guide to the story's theme. What clues, if any, do you find in the title "A Visit of Charity"? Of course, determining a story's theme entails going beyond the title. You have to read, and usually reread, the entire text. In doing so, you may come across a statement that seems a candidate for the theme because it is a philosophical generalization. Nevertheless, take the time to consider whether the story's essence is indeed captured by this statement alone. Number 3. You can state a text's theme either as an observation or as a recommendation. Each way of putting it evokes a certain image of the text's author. When you state the theme as an observation, you depict the author as a psychologist, a philosopher, or some other kind of analyst. When you state the theme as a recommendation, which often involves your using the word should, you depict the author as a teacher, preacher, manager, or coach. That is, the author comes across as telling readers what to do. As we have noted, stories are often used to teach lessons. Moreover, often the lessons are recommendations for action, capable of being phrased as do X or do not do X. The alternative is to make a generalization about some state of affairs. When you try to express a particular story's theme, which of these two options should you follow? There are several things to consider in making your decision. First is your personal comfort. Do you feel at ease with both ways of stating the theme, or is one of these ways more to your taste? Also worth pondering is the impression you want to give of the author. Do you want to portray this person as a maker of recommendations, or do you want to assign the author a more modest role? Number 4. Consider stating a text's theme as a problem. That way, you are more apt to convey the complexity and drama of the text. We have suggested that short stories often pivot around conflicts between people and conflicts within people. Perhaps the most interesting stories are ones that pose conflicts not easily resolved. Probably you will be more faithful to such a text if you phrase its theme as a problem. In the case of Welty's story, for example, you might state the theme as follows: young people may sense an older person's infirmity, but, especially if that person is a stranger, they may as yet lack sufficient maturity and confidence to stay and help. Number 5. Rather than refer to the theme of a text, you might refer to a theme of the text, implying that the text has more than one. You would still be suggesting that you have identified a central idea of the text. Subsequently, you might have to defend your claim. Unlike the average novel, the typical short story pivots around only a few ideas. Yet you need not insist that the story you are analyzing has a single theme. The shortest piece of short fiction may have more than one, and your audience may well appreciate your admitting this. One theme of Welty's story may be that none of us can escape the passage of time. The old roommates aside, teenaged Marion seems on the brink of adulthood, and her concluding bus ride suggests that she is moving further into it. But additional themes are possible. A second idea, dramatized by the roommates' feud, may be that old age can test a person's spirit even as it hurts the person's body. Of course, to call either of these ideas a theme of the story is still to make a claim that requires support. Perhaps the biggest challenge you will face in writing about short stories is to avoid long stretches of plot summary. Selected details of the plot will often serve as key evidence for you. You will need to describe such moments from the story you are discussing, even if your audience has already read it. But your readers are apt to be frustrated if you just repeat plot at length. They will feel that they may as well turn back to the story itself rather than linger with your rehash. Your paper is worth your readers' time only if you provide insights of your own, analyzing the story rather than just summarizing it. To understand what analysis of a short story involves, let's turn to student Tanya Vincent. Assigned to write an argument paper about a short story, Tanya decided to focus on Welty's. She realized that for her paper to be effective, she had to come up with an issue worth addressing, a claim about that issue, and evidence for that claim. Moreover, she had to be prepared to identify her process of reasoning and her assumptions. For most writing assignments, settling on an issue will be your most important preliminary step. Without a driving question, you will have difficulty producing fresh, organized, and sustained analysis. For her paper on a visit of charity, the student writer Tanya chose to address this issue. What does the story suggest charity can mean? In part, she was drawn to this question because the word charity appears in the story's title and because it comes up in the famous passage from 1 Corinthians that we quoted earlier. But the question also enticed her because Welty's protagonist doesn't appear truly compassionate. A conventional definition of charity is that it is an expression of a sincere desire to help people. Given that Marion appears to lack this desire, is Welty's title ironic? Or does charity in some other sense of the word operate in the story? The student writer Tanya realized that she would be tackling an issue of definition. She would need to examine various possible meanings of charity and determine which are relevant to specific details of Welty's text. A paper about a short story doesn't have to mention explicitly all the elements of short fiction we've identified. Nevertheless, thinking of these elements can help you plan such a paper, providing you with some preliminary terms for your analysis. Tanya perceived that her paper would be very much about characters and plot. It might also dwell upon imagery and language. She knew, too, that she would be more apt to persuade her readers if she included quotations from the story. Yet, as with plot summary, quoting should be limited, so that the paper seems an original argument, not a recycling of the literary work's own words. Tanya sensed that practically every sentence of Welty's story could be quoted and then interpreted. At the same time, she realized that she should quote only some words, not all. Final draft of a student paper. Here is Tanya's final draft of her paper about a visit of charity. As you read it, keep in mind that it emerged only after she had done several preliminary drafts, in consultation with some of her classmates as well as her teacher. Although Tanya's paper is a good example of how to write about a short story, most drafts can stand to be revised further. What do you think Tanya has done well in her paper? If she planned to do yet another revision, what suggestions would you make? Tanya Vincent. The real meaning of charity in A Visit of Charity. Notice here, the student writer makes an assumption, but seems a reasonable one. Many people would define the word charity as an act in which an individual or institution sincerely offers material or spiritual comfort to someone less fortunate. In this respect, charity is a form of love. Such is the meaning implied in the King James translation of the most famous statement about charity, 1 Corinthians 13:13, and now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. In fact, some other translations of this biblical passage use love instead of charity, thereby suggesting that the two terms are more or less equivalent. But Marion, the protagonist of Eudora Welty's short story A Visit of Charity, does not appear to demonstrate this concept of charity when she visits the old lady's home. She gives no indication that she sincerely cares about any of its residents. Rather, she approaches the visit as a mechanical task that she must perform to raise her standing as a campfire girl. Nor does she seem to become much more empathetic after spending time at the home. Several readers of the story, therefore, might think its title ironic. Notice here how the student starts to introduce her issue and claim by referring to readers who are possibly superficial. This view may, however, be too limited. Welty may be encouraging us to move past our familiar concept of charity and give the word a meaning that can apply to her text in a non-ironic way. Notice here how the student writer makes a qualification. Tanya holds back from claiming certainty about Welty's intentions. It is true that Marion does not act lovingly or even compassionately on her trip to the home. Yet maybe her brief moments with the two elderly roommates provide charity to Marion herself, making her a beneficiary of it rather than a donor of it. After all, her encounter with the two women helps to make her at least a bit more aware of the stresses that old age can bring. Charity in this sense would mean the providing of a necessary lesson about what life can be like as an adult. Notice here how the introduction ends with main issue, a definitional kind, a main claim. Even though the two roommates do not intend to be benevolent teachers of the girl, her meeting with them has some value, for it gives her a preview of realities she will have to deal with more extensively as she grows up. Notice here how the student writer makes concession to readers who have trouble finding charity in the story. When we first meet her in the story, Marion seems anything but passionately devoted to improving life for the home's inhabitants. Probably Old Lady's Home is not the building's real name to begin with, but instead Marion's own insensitive designation. Clearly she looks upon her visit as a chore. To her, it is just something she must do to earn points. Later, we readers learned that she has even computed the specific amounts available to her. She had almost said that if campfire girls brought flowers to the old lady's home, the visit would count 1 extra point. And if they took a Bible with them on the bus and read it to the old ladies, it counted double. When, back at the story's start, she introduces herself to the nurse, she does not even pretend to be a true angel of mercy pursuing a higher spiritual purpose. I'm a campfire girl. I have to pay a visit to some old lady. So indifferent is she to the home's aged occupants that she candidly announces any of them will do. When she does meet with the two roommates, she chooses not to stay long with them. Notice how here and elsewhere in the paper, Tanya quotes from Welty's text. Nor does she offer charity in a traditional sense when one of the roommates begs. While the woman asks, have you a penny to spare for a poor old woman that's not got anything of her own? Marion is anxious to flee. Nor, when she does leave the pair, is her exit gradual, patient, and kind. She jumped up and moved toward a door, pulled violently against the old hands, ran down the hall, without looking behind her and without looking at the nurse, quickly retrieved a red apple, ran to meet the big bus, shouted at the bus, and jumped on. These frenzied motions indicate that Marion is ultimately repelled by the two women, not drawn to them as clients for her kindness. Notice here the transition to development of main claim. Nevertheless, perhaps Marion's experience with them confers a sort of charity upon her by alerting her to facts she will eventually have to face. When she first meets the roommate who is supposedly healthier, she is struck by the terrible, square smile stamped on her bony face. This seems more an image of death than of life, suggesting that Marion is beginning to grow conscious of mortality. This implication gets even stronger when Marion comes to the bed of the sicker woman, i.e., she wondered about her. She wondered for a moment as though there was nothing else in the world to wonder about. It was the first time such a thing had happened to Marion. More precisely, Marion seems to discover that people soon to die may become a mixture of helplessness and fierce self-assertion. To the girl, Addie repeatedly comes across as a sheep or lamb, a species of animal traditionally associated with innocence. Notice here how, as earlier, with wondered, Tanya shows attention to repetition. Even before she enters the room, Marion twice experiences Addie's voice as that of a sheep bleating, and at Addie's bedside she mentally compares the tearful, suffering woman to a little lamb. Yet Addie is also someone capable not only of refusing to tell her age, but also of berating her roommate. and yet you talk all the time until I think I'm losing my mind. In turn, the object of this scorn displays to Marion a similar blend of powerlessness and ferocity. In an affected, high-pitched whine, this roommate refers to herself as a poor old woman, but at the same time she suddenly clutched the child with her sharp little fingers. Indeed, if Addie comes across to Marion as a sheep or lamb, the girl senses right from the start of the meeting that the other woman is an aggressive bird. Suddenly Marion saw a hand, quick as a bird claw, reach up in the air and pluck the white cap off her head. In general, neither of the roommates fits the sentimental stereotype of the sweet old lady. But their difference from this image is precisely what can be educational for Marion. Their nearness to death, and the complex behavior they show in response to their fate, are matters that the girl will have to contend with a lot once she herself becomes a full-fledged adult. Notice here how the student writer makes concession to readers with a different view. While admitting that the sentence about the first time appears significant, some readers may doubt that Marion learns anything from this experience. Their skepticism would be understandable, given that she does not philosophize at length about the visit and ends it rather speedily. Welty does, however, suggest the stirrings of mental change in Marion by drawing our attention to the bodily disorientation she goes through in the old women's room. Immediately upon meeting them, she stood tongue-tied. Soon, her heart beat more and more slowly, her hands got colder and colder, and she could not hear whether the old women were saying anything or not. Moreover, she could not see them very clearly. A moment later, she winds up pitched against the chair and forgets her own name. Eventually, her heart nearly stopped beating altogether. These disabilities, though temporary, indicate that at some level of consciousness, Marion is having perceptions that she did not have before. Specifically, she seems to have glimmers of how death increasingly enters people's lives as they age. Notice here how the student writer, again, acknowledges that she can't be certain about Welty's thinking. The story's very last sentence further suggests that Marion either learns this lesson or vaguely intuits it. By taking a big bite out of the apple, she resembles Adam and Eve, whose own eating of an apple resulted in their becoming mortal. But in writing her story, Welty may also have had in mind a second biblical passage. Occurring just 2 lines before the famous statement about charity I have quoted, it is a well-known review of life's journey. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Although Marion is female, the line can still apply to her. Before her visit to the home, she has been a child, and she acts that way for much of her time there. But the visit may make her more inclined to put away childish things, in which case she herself would receive a form of charity from it. Course title: Arguing About Literature. Lecturer: Sammy Babak. Source: John's Chilburn, John Clifford, A Brief Guide to Arguing About Literature, 2nd edition. Thank you for your attendance. Don't forget to like and share the video. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more content to come.